صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على. We're on the last couple of days of the month of Ramadan, and this is the time when the energy wanes. Laylatul Qadr is done, and the Eid is in sight, and it's harder to come to the masjid every day, and it's harder to keep up with your juz of recitation every day. So we have to kind of find that last inspiration, that last hurrah, and finish off the month strong, inshallah. May Allah give us tawfiq to finish the month strongly, and then more importantly, I think, carry on with some of the energy and some of the inspiration that we've been able to gather during the month as we pass on into Shawwal and the months beyond. We've been speaking about different companions each night and trying to derive some lessons from their lives. The companion I want to focus on this evening is one that all of you are familiar with. It's Bilal ibn Rabah. So Bilal is a companion that becomes, I think, an icon for us in many ways. People use him as the, hopefully it's not like a bad thing to say, but like as a token black companion. This shows, equality, or this shows anti-racism, or like, so he gets kind of put out as that. Muslims will say, the Prophet had a black companion. He was a slave who was, freed, and was one of the very foremost and noble companions, honored by the Prophet, honored as one of the companions. And so I think sometimes it makes Muslims feel good that, in this, especially in a place that has a history of slavery, and a black slavery at that, and then all sorts of racial inequality. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy that we have this kind of legacy. We have this person in the ranks of the companions. Some of that idealism should be we should be a little skeptical of it. I'm not going to say anything negative about Bilal. Don't worry. I've told you about some companions, and I've said, but. There's always a but. There's no but with Bilal. But I'm saying there's a but with our conception. So one misconception that we sometimes, I think, have, and we carry over from the legacy of slavery in America, is that we associate slavery with black people. And that is particular to America, and maybe particular to European slavery. But that wasn't the case with slavery worldwide. And it wasn't the case with Arab slavery or what became Islamic slavery either. Right? So black was not equated with slavery. Slaves were not always black. Black people were not always slaves. It wasn't, that dark skin or like the skin color was not seen the same way as we kind of associate it now. And so you have people who are very dark. In fact, the true Arabs, what are called Arab Ariba, are the South Arabs, the Yemeni, and they were dark-skinned. Much darker than, the Lebanese or the northern Arab people now who are Arab Musta'riba. And these were they had an incredible civilization. They were the origin of Arabic culture. Arabic language came from South Arabia. And many of the prominent, these tribes, they came into the north, into Medina. The Aus and the Khazraj are Yemeni. The Khuza'a and the Quda'a and all these tribes that are around Mecca, they're also Yemeni. In Kufa, you have Yemeni tribes. So Yemeni, dark-skinned, was, that was the norm, actually, in Arabia. And their relations with Abyssinia, African, Ethiopian, Eritrean, like that area, that was one of the major superpowers of the time. That was the civilization that they looked up to. The Najashi of such fame as one who was a champion of Islam as he was doing taqiyya as a Christian king. He is also legendary. So all that just to say that we should resist trying to read into history anachronistically, that we take things that we now think or now feel and then try to push it back into history and then read history in a way that fits into our particular worldview. That's not necessarily the case. It's not correct at all. Bilal was Habashi, so he is from Abyssinia, from Ethiopia, from that area. He is owned in the Jahiliyyah by Umayyah ibn Khalaf, who is from the clan of Jumah. So Jumah was one of the clans. Like you have Banu Hashim, you have Banu Umayyah, you have Banu Taym, Banu Adi. So Jumah was one of the clans of Quraysh. And so Umayyah belonged to that. And he was one of the nobles, one of the people in Darul Imara who was, in the governing roles in Mecca. And he owns Bilal as one of his slaves. The story of how Bilal came to become Muslim and then came to become free, that is also legendary. You're no doubt familiar with it. So he was one of the early converts to Islam. And when he did convert, his master, Umayyah, being one of those prominent Qurayshis, he took to punishing and even torturing Bilal to force him to recant. So this is one dynamic that I'm not sure if we are so familiar with. In Mecca, you don't have a central government like we have now. Right? So now, for instance, someone commits a crime, someone does something wrong, then you have a government, system for investigating and prosecuting, and then, for instance, jailing the person or punishing the person. This is not the case in Arabia, in Mecca at least. It's decentralized, there's no central government, and if someone stepped out of line from my family, then I would take charge. If I was the leader of my family, then I would take charge of now disciplining that person. Because that's a disgrace to my family, to my clan. All right? And so when you see, for instance, Ammar bin Yasir and his father Yasir and Sumayya, so when they stepped out of line according to their clan, so they were attached to the Makhzum clan. That's another one of the clans of Quraysh. And since Abu Jahl was one of the senior members of the Makhzum clan, when they rebel against their system by becoming Muslim, there's no central authority that comes in and punishes them. Abu Jahl takes charge and says, you are our mawali, you are our clients who are associated with us. They're not actually Arab, they're not from his family, they're Yemeni, but they're attached to his family. So because you're attached to our family, you're now disgracing us, so we're going to punish you. And so he takes charge, actually personal charge, of whipping them and punishing them and finally killing Yasir and Sumayya because they refused to recant. And that is when Ammar is scared into recanting verbally and renouncing his allegiance to Rasulullah and to Islam. So that's something just to be aware of, that the tribes actually took charge of punishing, torturing, if need be killing, and if need be putting under house arrest individuals from their own family. Please, brothers, there's a lot of, you're right in front of me and it's very distracting. I don't need anything, brother. All I need is just a little bit of peace. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. All right, so when Bilal steps out of line because he is the slave of Umayyah, Umayyah takes charge of punishing him. He's my slave, he's a disgrace to me, and so he takes charge of punishing him. The way they punish him is gruesome. They lay him on the hot sand in the desert, and they put a rock on top of him that basically crushes him to the point that it makes him go unconscious from the pressure and the suffocation. And when that doesn't work, then they lift the rock off, they tie a rope around his neck, and he tells children to drag him through the streets of Mecca. Anything that they can to disgrace him, to break his will. And famously, when they tell him to recant, to renounce this one God and worship Lat and Uzza again, he famously says, Ahad, Ahad, Allah is one, Allah is one. So he refuses, and finally Umayyah himself gets disgusted with the whole thing, and he wants to be done with Bilal. The story of his freedom at this point is one that it causes some tension. And so I want to just talk a little bit about the sequence of events and who was involved. So famously, in the Sunni narrative of the story, Abu Bakr is seen as the savior, not only of Bilal, but also of 6 other individuals. There are 7 individuals total that in some history books, it's said that Abu Bakr was the one who freed them. And so this narrative is given to us that Abu Bakr was wealthy, and for instance, above the fray. So, just think for a second, put him aside. So Rasulullah, for instance, there's no one who's going to torture and punish, Rasulullah. First of all, because Abu Talib is there to protect him, and also because he's someone of high status. So someone of high status, they are free from torture. So no one ever goes after him to for instance, torture him and get him to recant. They go after the low people, the slaves, the mawali, people who are clients and associated with these families. They're the ones who are tortured. So we have, for instance, Ammar bin Yasir and his parents and his brother Abdullah. We have, for instance, Khabbab ibn al-Arat, who's also one of the mawali, Abu Fukayha, Amir ibn Fuwayha. So these sorts of individuals who were kind of nobodies in terms of the social structure, when they became Muslim, then their particular clans would come in and torture them, punish them, to try to get them to come back to shirk, to come back to their own religions. So the claim is that Abu Bakr was also, for instance, high enough on the totem pole that he was not subject to this kind of punishment and pressure from the Quraysh or from his own tribe of Taym. And so he was kind of floating it around as a free agent, and he could use his wealth to then come and buy and free Bilal and free these other individuals. The problem is that the same Sunni narratives also say that actually no. I mean, we know, for instance, that Taym is actually very low on the totem pole. So if you think of Quraysh as this big umbrella, you have all of these different clans within Quraysh. So the very most noble of the clans of Quraysh and the most powerful are Banu Hashim and Banu Umayyah, and you could say Banu Makhzum is also up there with Abu Jahl, for instance. He's definitely at the top. So these are maybe the most powerful and most noble clans. But then you have others like the Sahm clan that Amr ibn al-As belongs to. They seem to have had some ascendancy at some point, but by this time their numbers are very low and they're not really that important. And they have to kind of come under the umbrella of Banu Umayyah. But the clan of Taym in particular, and Adi, which is the clan of Umar, so Taym is Abu Bakr's clan, and Adi is the clan of Umar. These two clans are kind of at the very bottom rung of Quraysh's social structure. So that idea that he could be somehow noble and exempt from torture and punishment, that doesn't pan out with this idea that he's from Taym, which is a very lowly clan of Quraysh. And the other thing is we have reports actually. So the brother of Lady Khadija, his name is Nawfal ibn Khuwaylid. So Khadija bint Khuwaylid, her brother is Nawfal ibn Khuwaylid. He was one of the staunchest of the mushrikeen and one of the ones who really exerted his force to torture and to punish the Muslims. And he was a terrible person. And in fact, in the aftermath of Badr, he's captured. And he's one of the people that Rasulullah has executed. He tells Imam Ali, execute him. And he kills him. Khadija's brother, nothing like his sister. She is the most devoted servant of Rasulullah and the most, one who puts all her assets at the disposal of the Prophet. And her brother is this terrible individual who the Prophet sees that he's worthy of being executed as a prisoner in the aftermath of Badr. So before all of this, in the Meccan period, I drew a blank on his name now. I just said his name. Anyway, so Ibn Khuwaylid, this Nawfal. So Nawfal ibn Khuwaylid, Khadija's brother, he captures captures Abu Bakr and Talha ibn Ubaidullah. We talked about him several days ago, that in the early days he was also a very devoted companion of Rasulullah. He was one of the early converts, and we talked about his different devotions to Rasulullah early on. So these two are both from Taym, they're cousins. And because they're from a low clan, this Nawfal ibn Khuwaylid, he captures them and he famously binds them together in such a way that they go down in history. They're known as Al-Qarinan, Al-Qarinain, the two who were bound together. So Talha and Abu Bakr are Al-Qarinan. So you can't have it both ways. Either he's so high in the social structure that he's immune to all of this, and he's wealthy and powerful, so he can come and sweep in and buy Bilal and free him and this and that, or he's weak and he's subject to all the torture, and he's captured by this Nawfal, and he's tortured and he's bound and treated like that. So both of those are contradictory narrations that are both in the kind of history and the biography of Abu Bakr in Sunni sources. Shi'i ulama have pushed back against that claim that Abu Bakr was the one who freed Bilal, mainly because Bilal and all the other Mawali who were freed at this point are known as Mawali of Rasulullah, Mawla Rasulullah. So that phrase Mawla, we know it, we call Imam Ali alayhi salam Mawla, for instance. So Mawla is a confusing word in Arabic because it's used in opposite meanings. Your Mawla is your master, and your Mawla is also your slave. All right, so just like Ali, for instance, we say our Rasulullah is our Mawla in terms of being above us and our master. We have a wilaya and we want to connect ourselves to him and he has authority over us. We're also striving to be Mawali of Rasulullah so that we can be those who have attached ourselves to him and we are under that authority. Just like Allah is our wali, we also hope to be awliya of Allah. Awliya is the plural of wali. Right? So a wali of Allah is a friend of Allah, someone who is under that authority, and Allah also is Allahu waliyul ladina amanu. He's also the authority over us. So Mawla and Wali, it becomes confusing because it's used for both. So Rasulullah is the Mawla of Bilal, but Bilal is also the Mawla of Rasulullah. Right? Because he is now owned by Rasulullah momentarily, and then he's freed by him. And in that society, if you were freed by someone, you would still maintain a connection to your former master. He would still be your protector. He would still be the one you would go to for help. He would still help you to get married. Right? That's one big difference between the slavery of America, for instance, and the slavery of that society. It wasn't seen as something that you have to escape from and run away from, and once you get away, then you cut ties and you never want to see your master again because he's been cruel to you. If he was a good master, then that wasn't the case. You can be free, but you're still seen as a member of that family, that clan, and you're known as a Mawla of that person. So Bilal is Mawla Rasulullah. Everyone agrees that he is Mawla Rasulullah, meaning that Rasulullah is the one who freed him, not Abu Bakr. So typically Shi'i scholars will have rejected that idea that Abu Bakr had anything to do with the purchasing or the freeing of Bilal, and that all those stories that are told in Sunni traditions are part of the effort to try to inflate the role and the importance of Abu Bakr because of historical reasons, and to downgrade the role of the Prophet or the Imam or other people in history. There is a middle ground, I think, because we have an indication that there are reports that tell us that Abu Bakr, first of all, Rasulullah, he sees the plight of his followers who are being tortured. He himself can't directly intervene because he's also in a precarious position. But he encourages those who are able amongst the Muslims to step in and try to help them by buying their freedom, intervening somehow, whatever you can do, find a way to help them. And so it seems that Abu Bakr, he tries to help. He doesn't have the power to do it, so he taps into Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, because he's wealthy, he's powerful, he's not a Muslim yet, but he's powerful, he's from Banu Hashim, he's not subject to any of these things. He's like Abu Talib in terms of having that high noble status in Mecca, so he taps into him and says, can you help and intervene? And so Abbas is the one who then buys Bilal and buys these individuals and basically negotiates their freedom and hands them over to Abu Bakr, who then hands them over to Rasulullah. It was Rasulullah who said, go help these people, do whatever you can. So like this, Abu Bakr played a role in facilitating it. And so it's correct. I mean, you can say Abu Bakr helped to free Bilal and Rasulullah helped to free Bilal. And Abbas also helped to free Bilal. All of them had a role to play in it. But really they're just acting, Abu Bakr is acting as the agent of Rasulullah, and Bilal comes into the possession of Rasulullah as his own slave, and then immediately he frees him and he becomes Mawla Rasulullah. So that way, these narratives all make sense. The main reason for saying this and rejecting that, like the typical perspective of our Shi'i ulama, which has been to reject any role for Abu Bakr, is because of a hadith that we have from Bilal. After Saqifa, after Abu Bakr takes power, Umar comes to Bilal and says, give your bay'ah to Abu Bakr. And Bilal's response is no, and Umar actually gets very angry at him. He says he even grabs his collar, or grabs him by the neck, and says, you owe it to him. He freed you. And so Bilal's response, recite one salawat and I'll read you his response. Technology never works when you need it. Recite one more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Bilal, his response to Umar is very profound, and it clearly shows that he recognizes that Abu Bakr did play a role in his freedom, but there should not be any strings attached. I don't owe you anything because of that. Recite salawat one more time, inshallah I'll find it. So he says, if he freed me, Bilal says this about Abu Bakr, if he freed me for God's sake, then let him leave me to God. But if he freed me for other than that, then here I am willing to be his slave again. But as for pledging allegiance to him, I shall not pledge allegiance to one whom the Messenger of God did not install as his successor, while allegiance to the one whom he did install weighs on our necks till the day of resurrection. Right? That's Bilal's response to Umar. So he recognizes that Abu Bakr played a role. That's implicit in his response. He's not saying, what did he do? He was not part of the equation. No, he played a role, but what was his intention? What was the purpose for which he freed me? Did he free me for God's sake? Then he did a great job. Allah will reward him for having done a great deed, but now I am free. You can't hold that over me, lord that over me and say, oh, because I freed you, now you have to leave the truth and be loyal to me no matter what I say. You have no right over me. If you freed me for God's sake, then let me go in God's way. And if you freed me for your own purposes and for your own ulterior motives, then I'm still your slave. I'll be complicit in your affairs, whatever. I can be your slave again even. Right? But don't call me to leave the truth. I was there, Ghadir. I know what Rasulullah said, and I know that the successorship of Rasulullah is with someone else other than Abu Bakr. I'm not going to give my allegiance to Abu Bakr just because he's the one who freed me. So for that reason, because we have this kind of statement from Bilal, which implicitly acknowledges that Abu Bakr played a role, on the other hand, we know that that Bilal was Mawla Rasulullah, he was freed by Rasulullah, so he belonged to him, not to Abu Bakr. Right? So one way to kind of put everything together is to say that Abu Bakr played a role as the agent of Rasulullah, as a middleman trying to do what Rasulullah was saying, to go and help these people. He couldn't do it himself because he was himself so weak. So he finds Abbas, and Abbas then helps, and then together they free Bilal, and then he delivers Bilal to Rasulullah, who frees him. And so he's known as Mawla Rasulullah, but yes, Abu Bakr played a role. But that role doesn't make Bilal, like one of the great things that we see in Bilal is that he doesn't get dissuaded because of the favor that Abu Bakr played in his freedom. He doesn't get dissuaded from the truth. He stays loyal to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And one of the problems with this departure from Abu Bakr's plan and his loyalty is that Bilal is a very prominent figure. He is the mu'adhin of Rasulullah. Right? So he, from early on, so even the story of the adhan is one that's become convoluted, but it's very clear that the adhan was given to Rasulullah during Mi'raj. There are, in Sirah of Ibn Hisham, there's a story that this individual, I'm forgetting his name, Zayd, I think is his name, that he's the one who saw in a dream that this adhan is being called, and so he was given inspiration, and then he makes the suggestion, and then that becomes part of our sharia. when it's very clear that this is something that's from Allah, it's part of the deen that's given to Rasulullah. The reports on Mi'raj also tell us that Rasulullah, when he was on the Mi'raj, Gabriel called the adhan and taught him this adhan when he was praying with all the prophets and in those realms above. And then when he comes back, then he teaches this adhan to his followers. In the Meccan period, the story of this Zayd or even Omar, the ones who are supposed to have seen this dream, where they hear the adhan in their dream, and then they tell the Prophet, and then he says, "Go teach Bilal." These are all happening in the Medinan period, much later, and it's a totally false kind of a claim. So Bilal, from day one, was the mu'adhin of Rasulullah, and he had a voice that was powerful, that was. You'll see when he gives the adhan what kind of effect it has on people. The nostalgia it brings back. People associate his voice with Rasulullah himself. So when he refuses to give allegiance to Abu Bakr, he also says, "I will never give adhan again since Rasulullah has passed away." And so that's a big blow to the claims of Saqifa and the claims that all the companions and all the people of Medina have given bay'ah to Abu Bakr, when the Prophet's mu'adhin, public person who's constantly giving adhan, suddenly protests, say, "I'm no longer going to give adhan. Because now the person who's supposed to be commanding me to give the adhan is no longer there. His successor is not in place either, so I refuse." So they exile him to Syria because of that. So he now, not immediately, we'll see one story that happens before he leaves, but he will end up leaving and going to Damascus. He does visit one more time, and I'll tell you the story of his return, but he ends up dying in Damascus, and he's buried there. So that kind of a companion, these are all breadcrumbs that you see when you see that Fatima Zahra is buried at night and nobody prays on her body and we don't know where her grave is. When you see Ali ibn Abi Talib is buried, nobody knew where he was buried for generations until finally in the 6th Imam's time it was uncovered. When you see these kinds of things, you see Bilal ibn Rabah is exiled and he dies in exile. You see Abu Dhar is exiled to Rabada and he dies in exile in Rabada. All of these should be very clear indications to anyone who understands history that something's going on. Why are people abandoning? Why are people leaving? Why are people being exiled who were so close to Rasulullah? What happened that these frictions and these tensions were born and everything's falling apart? That's a clear indication that this government of Abu Bakr is not one that these companions were willing to accept. And in protest, they were speaking out against. Either they left or they were exiled and sent away. I'll share some of these incidents in just a few minutes. Let me just say one more thing. So we have this one hadith that is seen by our ulama, by Shi'i ulama, as being a manufactured, a forged tradition, but it's quite famous, and so I just want to address that as well. So there's a hadith that's attributed to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, where he says, "As-sabiquna arba'atun." Those who were foremost were four. He says, "Fa'ana sabiqul Arab, wa Bilal sabiqul Habash, wa Suhaib sabiqul Rum, wa Salman sabiqul Fars." Right, wa sabiquna al-awwalun. We had from the verse of Surah At-Tawbah. So the Prophet in this hadith is saying that those who are foremost, so foremost could either be the first to become Muslim, or it could be the best. So he's saying either the best or the first are four. So he says, I, Rasulullah, am the sabiq of the Arabs, the first amongst the Arabs to become Muslim, or the best of the Arabs to become Muslim. Fine, that part is clear, and that he's sabiqul awwalin wal akhirin. He's the best of all creation. So no question there. But then he says, Bilal Sabiqul Habash, he's the foremost, or the first of the Ethiopians to accept, or Abyssinians to accept Islam. That's also fine. We don't know of anyone else before him from Habasha who converted to Islam, and he was definitely amongst the best, if not the best, of those who converted from that particular race and civilization. And then Salman, no question there either. Salman Sabiqul Fars, that amongst the Iranis and the Persians, Salman is the first and the foremost to accept. So those three are fine. There's no question about those individuals being at the top tier of converts and in terms of temporarily converting and also their level of faith. But then Suhaib is also included in this. Suhaib ibn Sinan, is that a name that's familiar to you all? Suhaib al-Rumi? All right, so Suhaib is, in Sunni circles, he's quite one of the, maybe equal to Bilal or somewhere up there with Bilal in terms of being a very well-known companion. Suhaib, he's known as Suhaib al-Rumi. Rum means Byzantine. Eastern Roman Empire is the Byzantine Empire, and so he's supposed to have come from there. That seems to also be a misnomer because he was actually Yemeni, but probably he was owned by a Byzantine, and somehow he was either sold or captured or whatever from the Byzantines, and so since he came through the Byzantines, then he became known as a Rumi. But this Suhaib, we have a hadith from the 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where he mentions both Bilal and Suhaib, and he says, "Kana Bilal abdan salihan, wa kana Suhaib abda saw'in, kana yabki ala Umar." Right. So he says that Bilal was a wonderful abd. Now, abd here I think means Abdullah, a servant of God. He's not saying abd as a slave, but maybe there's double entendre. They're both former slaves, and then they were freed and they became Muslims. So anyway, whichever one he means, whether he means as slaves they were wonderful and they became wonderful Muslims, or as Abdullah he was wonderful. But Suhaib, on the other hand, he contrasts and says he was abda saw, an evil servant of God, an evil person, evil servant. And he mentions kana yabki ala Umar. He had a loyalty to Umar, and he was the one who prayed the janazah prayer for Umar, and he was kind of the stopgap between Umar's death and the council, the shura, which eventually selected Uthman as the successor to Umar. So Suhaib ibn Sinan was a loyalist to Umar, and he led the prayers and kind of acted as temporary deputy Khalifa until Uthman took power. And so because of his bad loyalties, because of his loyalty to Umar in particular, and the fact that he led the janazah prayer, and this hadith is indicating that he also mourned for him, maybe it was a regular thing that he felt very sad for Umar's death. So Imam Sadiq puts a finger on him and says that he was abda saw, he was an evil person, not like Bilal. So that gives us a good indication, first of all, where Bilal stands, that he is contrasted at the high end of the spectrum, and the Suhaib is also put in his place. And that's also important to know. It's good to know, tawalli and tabarri are both important things for us to do. To know who's good, to know what qualities are good, what's godly, and to draw close to that, and to identify what's evil, what's bad, who are bad characters, to identify that and also know our stance against those things. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable with the latter part, the tabarri part. Like, let's just leave them alone. That's between Allah and them. If they did something wrong, then we say, may Allah forgive them, for instance, may Allah be pleased with them. But who are we to judge? We have a duty to take a stance against falsehood. We can't simply say, I don't have anything to do with falsehood, I like truth. So I'm with truth, but I'm not really against falsehood. I'll leave falsehood alone. I'm with the Prophet, his enemies, I'm okay. I don't have anything to say about his enemies. I'm with Allah, shaitan, I don't have anything to say about shaitan. Like, having that kind of indifference towards evil is itself evil. We're called on to polarize correctly, align ourselves with truth and against falsehood. Both are important. I can't simply say, Allah is my ilah. I need to say, La ilaha illallah. The negation of all other aliha is also very important for clarifying that my belief in God is that He's my sole deity, my sole creator, my sole provider. Not that God is also my deity, but I have other deities too. Because that was the creed of the mushrikeen as well. وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهِ. They had no problem, the mushrikeen had no problem saying Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth. But in addition to Allah being the creator of the heavens and the earth, then we also have Lat and Uzza and Manat and all these different Wad wa Suwa' wa Yahuth and all these other gods that are under God and who are managing our affairs and these kinds of things. So the problem for them was not in believing in God, it's in disavowing all the other gods. And we have to do both. So both tabarri and tawalli are important features of the Muslim and of our ideology, and we shouldn't neglect one for the other. So that's something about Bilal, something about Suhaib as well. There are a couple of traditions I'll share with you to close. One, about this adhan. So we're told in Man La Yahduru al-Faqih, so Shaykh Saduq's collection of hadith, he narrates the following tradition from Abu Basir, from one of the either fifth or the sixth imams, أنه قال إن بلالا كان عبدا صالحا فقال لا أؤذن لأحد بعد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. So he also says in this hadith that he was a righteous servant, and he mentions that Bilal himself said that I shall not give adhan for anyone after Rasulullah. But as a consequence, the Imam mentions فَتُرِكَ يَوْمَئِذٍ حَيَّا عَلَى خَيْرِ الْعَمَلِ. Because Bilal gave up the position of adhan, then his adhan also was able to get changed and lost. And so the person who comes in his place, he drops the حَيَّا عَلَى خَيْرِ الْعَمَلِ, which is part of the adhan, and it was lost for the Sunnis from that point. Now he says, I will not give adhan for anyone, but we have evidence that he did make an exception twice. Once must have been shortly after Rasulullah passed away, after Saqifa, after he made his stance against Abu Bakr, after he said, I'm no longer going to give the adhan. We're told that Lady Fatima al-Zahra, she made a special request to Bilal and said, I have a longing to hear the adhan of my father's mu'adhin. So I'll read the tradition to you also from Shaykh Saduq's collection. He says, لما قبض النبي صلى الله عليه وآله امتنع بلال من الأذان. After the Prophet passed away, Bilal refused to give the adhan any longer. وقال لا أؤذن لأحد بعد رسول الله. وإن فاطمة عليها السلام قالت ذات يوم إني أشتهي أن أسمع صوت مؤذن أبي. She says, I have this desire to hear the voice of the mu'adhin of my father. فبلغ ذلك بلالا فأخذ في الأذان. So he got the request and he said the adhan, just as a personal in answer to this personal request from Lady Fatima. فلما قال الله أكبر ذكرت أباها وأيامه فلم تتمالك من البكاء. She lost control of herself. She couldn't help remembering her father's memory when she heard Bilal's voice, and she began to cry. فلما بلغ إلى قوله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله شهقت فاطمة عليها السلام وسقطت لوجهها. She fainted and she fell on her face. وغشي عليها, she went unconscious. فقال الناس لبلال أمسك يا بلال فقد فارقت ابنة رسول الله الدنيا وظنوا أنها ماتت. So they rushed to Bilal and say, stop. The daughter of Rasulullah, she's left this dunya, she's given up her soul and she's died because of your adhan. So stop here. فقطع أذانه, he stops. ولم يتمه, he doesn't complete it. فأفاقت فاطمة, she had only passed out, she wakes up. وسألته أن يتم الأذان, she asks him to continue. He said, فلم يفعل وقال لها يا سيدة النسوان. He doesn't, and he tells her, O mistress of all women, إني أخشى عليك مما تنزلينه بنفسك إذا سمعتي صوتي بالأذان. He says, I'm afraid for your life and what will occur to you if I continue with the adhan. And so she allows him not to continue, and she recognizes that's the right idea, and she lets him go and doesn't insist that he complete the adhan. So that's one exception when he recited the adhan before Lady Fatima passed away. Then we're told, so he goes off to Syria, to Damascus in exile, and then he returns to Mecca and Medina, probably for Umrah or for Hajj. Actually, he'll tell us in the hadith itself. So we're told that in a dream, while he's at Damascus, he sees this. He sees Rasulullah. Inna Bilalan ra'a fi manamihi nabi wa huwa yaqulu lahu. He sees Rasulullah in a dream, and Rasulullah tells Bilal in the dream, Ma hadhihi al-jafwa ya Bilal. What kind of an insult is this, O Bilal, to me? Ama ana laka an tazurani ya Bilal. Isn't it time that you come to visit me? Right? He's been gone for some years now, and Rasulullah, through this dream, he talks to Bilal and says, what kind of insult is this that you stayed away for so long? Come back to Medina and do ziyarah of my grave. فانتبه حزينا وجلا خائفا فركب راحلته وصعد المدينة وقصد المدينة. So he wakes up in tears and fear, just out of sorts, and he makes his intention to go to Medina for ziyarah, perhaps for Hajj, perhaps for Umrah, whatever it was, but to do ziyarah of Rasulullah in answer of this dream. فقصد المدينة فأتى قبر النبي. So he comes to Medina, he comes to the grave of Rasulullah. فجعل يبكي عنده ويمرغ وجهه عليه. He begins to cry at the grave of Rasulullah. He begins to rub his face into the soil around the grave of Rasulullah. وأقبل الحسن والحسين. Imam Hassan and Hussein come to Bilal. فجعل يضمهما ويقبلهما. He begins to hug them. He begins to lavish kisses on them. فقال له يا بلال نشتهي أن نسمع أذانك الذي كنت تؤذنه لرسول الله. So Imam Hassan and Hussein tell him that we would love to hear the adhan that you used to give for our grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. فعلى سطح المسجد. He climbed onto the roof of the masjid. فوقف موقفه الذي كان يقف فيه. He goes to the same place where he used to stand to deliver the adhan from the roof of the masjid. فلما أن قال الله أكبر ارتجت المدينة. When he started saying the adhan, all of Medina started to shake. Just the interest of people, and people kind of, their attention was suddenly piqued, and all of a sudden it's like the whole city came to a standstill because they hear the voice of Bilal. When he said Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah zadat ajijuha, the outcries of people, the amazement of people increased when he said as he said the adhan. فلما أن قال أشهد أن محمد رسول الله خرج العواتق من خدورهن فقالوا أبعث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. Women were coming out of their homes and they're asking, has Rasulullah himself been resurrected? Where this adhan of Bilal, which was, they coupled together with Rasulullah, when they hear his voice, they think Rasulullah must be here too. فَمَا رُؤِيَ يَوْمٌ أَكْثَرُ بَاكِيًا وَلَا بَاكِيَةً بَعْدَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمِ. No day was seen when there were more people crying in Medina than on that day, the report tells us. This latter report was from Ustul Ghaba. It's a Sunni source, Ibn al-Athir's history. And so he reports this, that Imam Hassan and Hussein were the ones who requested him. So this gives us this, I think, a very important history. Through Bilal, we once again have a lens to the events before Saqifa in the life of Rasulullah. We have an eye to Saqifa itself and the friction that was caused by that. And we see that Bilal is one of those many litmus tests that we have. That he was one who was loyal to Amir al-Mu'mineen, to Ahlul Bayt, and we see that he protests against the government that came into power and usurped power. And if we stick with these companions and will follow in their footsteps, then we will be on the right path. We will be loyal servants also of the rightful successor of Rasulullah, of the Ahlul Bayt. And we will be also correctly and solid in our opposition to those who usurp the power. Not that we're indifferent to that or we have no judgment against it. We can be with the truth and we must also be against falsehood. And these companions help to show us that very important balance that we have to strike. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to know and to recognize the stories of these great companions. Help us to learn from their example. purify our faith, strengthen us in our faith, help us to be muwalin and people who draw close to the Ahlul Bayt, and also mu'adin and people who are enemies with all who are false and all that is false. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.